of neuroscience, visual neuroscience, was the assumption that because when we open our eyes we see everything as if were together, that vision is a unitary process. And in the service of that assumption, all the evidence which showed it otherwise was dismissed for over 100 years. Between 1860, when the visual cortex was first charted, to 1970, it was generally supposed that vision is a single process. And it was only in the 1970s that we began to discover that it's actually made up of many, many separate processes, which raise the question of how we bring things together. So that's the critical problem which you see in Venice almost every moment, of bringing the whole, bringing the particulars into the whole. It's a problem which neuroscience has not solved. There's another reason why neuroscience has not solved this problem, because of the assumption that even in spite of the fact that the visual process may be made up of several sub-processes, specialized for colors, for form, for motion, that nevertheless when we open our eyes, all these processes are active at exactly the same time and terminate their task at the same time. Wrong. Actually, we see color before we see motion by about 100 milliseconds, which is a very long time in neural terms. We see color before we see form. We see the expression on faces before we can recognize the identity of faces. So the question becomes then of how the brain can assemble all these things together. And this is a problem that neurobiology has not been able to solve, and I think largely because it has made assumptions which turn out to be false. Now, if you look at the greatest failures of neurobiology, I mean, I'm talking in our context today, there are two. One is the one I've just mentioned, the assumption that the vision is a single process, and therefore that there must be a single cortical area devoted to all aspects of vision. And the other one is the assumption that the cortex, the cerebral cortex, which is largely of uniform structure, must have a uniform function. This is the view of Carl Lashley and others, so that the mind acts as a unit, and the brain acts as a unit. Now, this has never worked, and nobody knows how the brain combines everything together. What has been very successful, if you were to be forced to write the history of cerebral cortex in one single sentence, you would say the success of it has been the capacity to isolate specific cortical areas and assign specific functions to each. That is the success story of the cerebral cortex. But the fear of what people call reductionism and the fear of demystifying. People say to me, you don't want to demystify love and desire and beauty. Why do you want to do these things? That fear itself is an interesting, very interesting problem, which in preparing my talk for today, I think is worthy itself of study. I mean, why is it that people are not afraid of reductionism in physics? After all, physics has gone through from molecule to sub-molecules to atom to subatomic particles, and nobody seems to be really especially afraid of this, or in chemistry. But we are afraid of reductionism in art, in consciousness, in thought. And I wonder why that is, because my definition of the brain, or the functions of the brain, is it tries to make sense of things, of whether it be visual or spoken or music or art. It tries to make sense of things. When it cannot make sense of things, it then falls back upon superstition. Now, why is it that we want to maintain that superstition? This is an extremely interesting phenomenon. In the Christian tradition, and actually also in the Jewish and Islamic tradition, God is unknowable. And therefore you would have you forever have an unquenched desire for God to be assimilated and united to God. Now, is that a reason? I mean, because of our strong religious roots, whether we are religious or not. Is that a reason why we are so afraid of reductionism and so afraid of demystifying things? I was very surprised and horrified recently when I was giving a talk about love. If you look at the literature of love, there are very interesting insights that you can gain into the brain. There is certainly in the Islamic Sufi tradition, but also very much in the Christian tradition, an ambivalence, an ambiguity between love of God and love of a human, and God, who is very beautiful, is the only person who can create somebody who's very beautiful. And as Farid ibn Attar puts it, that it is this unquenched desire for God, an unquenchable desire for God, that leads you to the unquenchable desire for the unity with the lover. Because only God can create somebody who's so beautiful. Now, somebody said that this was blasphemy. It was blasphemy because of confusion of God, of love of sacred with profane love. But it is not blasphemy because it's not I who said it. You can find it in Dante. You can find it in Petrarca. Petrarca loved a woman called Laura. We don't even know whether she existed. And in the end, it was all his life a competition between his love of God and his love of Laura. And in the end, Laura won. It's there in Rumi and Hafiz, and of course in the Hindi tradition, and in John Donne. I mean, John Donne's poetry is extremely, his early poetry, extremely erotic, and metamorphoses into religious. So I think one of the interesting things one of the interesting great themes that comes out of all these studies, and I think I could actually give this talk by reference to your art alone. The combining the elements, because in your slides you showed some details, but you also showed the whole. I think this theme of the capacity of the brain of us to combine elements into a whole, this desire not to know about the whole, this fear of knowing about the whole, is I think a theme that is of enormous interest, which we'll be hearing more and more about in the coming 20-30 years.
Thank you very much, both of you. Now, first of all, I would like to set a very informal kind of symposium, so everyone who has something to say, please just say it. Just take part in the discussion, because anyway, we're all sitting here between each other, and I think we have no public, so we're doing it for ourselves. So everyone who has questions or comments, just do it. So you both made quite a statement. It's not easy to moderate you alone.
Oh, you can.
I know something about that. I've been his students for ages. So no, it's not easy. I admit to try to take out something about putting together art and science is not intuitive, but I think what you were saying now about why people are afraid of reductionism, it probably depends upon the kind of questions that now neuroscience is approaching and contemporary art is approaching too. So we are starting to ask to ourselves not anymore about the anatomy or the chemistry of the nervous system, but we are starting to discuss about things that are scary. So neuroscience is approaching questions, and art, contemporary art too, about the human being, who we are, where do we go, what is love, where are we ending. So these are metaphysical questions, and we are trying to give answer to that, and I think we are in a point in which already asking this question is scary, so being afraid of an answer is fair. I mean, why not? But then this is the kind of approach that is interesting from the art viewpoint and makes neuroscientists interested in art, probably, because it's not easy to find answers to these questions. It's not easy scientifically to find these kind of answers, and so probably methodologically in science we are used to reduce complexity, while art provides the most complex account about the human being. Now when you were talking about seeing is already a creative process, I was thinking about this portrait, self-portrait by Giacometti of 1935, where he shows his portrait with one eye open and the other eye closed. And John Berger wrote about it. One eye is looking to the world and the other is looking into himself. So seeing is this both-way approach, looking outside and looking inside. And so I think that a dialogue between art and neuroscience can already come out from this looking inside the human being and looking around.
Well, also, I just want to say something that's interesting about where you were talking about the fear of reductivism. And as an artist, I'm always very aware of, or even as a viewer, I'm very aware of the viewing process. And it seems to me there's frequently a tendency to immediately reduce a piece of artwork rather than let it be expansive, or to come at it as sort of an aesthete and let the artwork take you places rather than coming in and dismissing it to the most kind of basics. And in fact, I walked through the Arsenale before it was open with someone, and it was a really amazing thing. They were like, "Oh, this is just more of this trash art. Oh, this is just scatter stuff. This is, you know," and so to have the responsibility as a viewer to have agility and to let the artwork be open and be equally as open, rather than have the kind of impulse to reduce it. I mean, this is something that I sort of...
But it's a very interesting point to consider from the point of view of artists and from the point of view of science. Now, you see, I'm going to say a few words about Cézanne, and then I'd like to ask you a question. Cézanne undertook a problem which is of major interest to neuroscience, which is how do form and color interact? Modulate form by color. Cézanne always said, I have to develop my whole canvas at the same time. And yet every detail was measured. Someone said Cézanne left nothing to chance. Everything was fully thought of. So one of the interesting things that I would like to ask you, maybe we can have one or two of your slides that you can show us. Do you conceive, when you start, do you conceive of the entire work and then work on the details, or do you let the details build up the whole? But you cannot deny, I should think, that there are details which you're very concerned with, and the whole you're very concerned with, and they are implicitly there in your work.
I wish it were that straightforward. There's so many, and especially in this case, because it has been like every single day, a day to suspend expectations because of...
Well, let me choose a slide because you made the point sotto voce.
You can even choose up here.
Okay. Let us look at these two. You see, you went from the whole to the detail in your slide.
And I went from the plan to the whole to the details. So I went from the expectation, which was this.
Okay.
Which is, I guess I should just show the slideshow. So I went from the desire to the reality, and then we just get.
But the desire was a desire of what?
Well, it was always speculative. It always approached the artwork as something speculative and with a certain allowance of improvisation. And this is also something when you work with fabricators, which is something that I do a lot as well, is I like to have the unknown happen. I don't like to have the absolute control that will disappoint. I like to have some sort of a surprise, some sort of, agility, I guess. And
But the surprise is in the whole. But you can only have that surprise when you introduce the detail, which is the particulars.
yeah, well, I mean, I suppose the details for me are sort of along the way. It is probably the whole, but the whole